Okay, so the video we just watched, we're not going to have on YouTube, but I will probably try to put the link, if I remember, in the description, so that anybody watching can watch the video too. What are some thoughts? I have a lot of thoughts that went through my mind. I watched that last night, but watching it again, I found it kind of emotional, and I don't know, what are some of your thoughts on what we study today, what the message is, and watching that video on human rights?
Just frustration that people don't get it. Or not people in general, people do. It's the leadership that just won't allow it because they want that power.
Yeah, we saw that in the article too that we're working on as well.
This was a very powerful video, and yeah, thank you for finding this and sharing it with us. You know, what I find, uh, Logina and I, our family, we did quite a bit of traveling, whether it be around the United States or in Europe or in South America. And generally, what we find is that people are all the same. Um, and it's just amazes me how we look at other countries. I mean, when I say we, I don't mean this movement, us. I mean just generally. We look at, or people look at us cross-eyed, or we look at others cross-eyed because of what we see in the media, and and that's all we know. What we are, what we see in pictures and media, and we think people are like that, like all Muslims are terrorists, right? Or um, I think in one of the in um, one of the Olympics just passed recently, there was two female sword fencers, one from Ukraine and one from Russia. And Russia, put her sword fencing, whatever this is called, I guess it's a sword, put it down and went across and to shake the Ukrainian's hand. And the Ukrainian women would not. She refused. She actually held out her fencing, her sword against, against the female Russian fencer. And I said, "Don't come any nearer." And she refused. Um, and I think that was wrong. Like I said, people generally, I don't know what the government thinks of each other, but people generally are nice people. They're good people, and they all generally want the same thing. Whether your skin color is different, whether you're white, brown, or black. These other countries that we go to, they want to speak to you. They want to know about your affairs. And it's just amazes me how I think that's what I mean. Yeah, human rights. Yeah, we have to define it, and there's 30 of them, and it's UN, but it is hard to define. Um, but it's just how you treat one another, and I think, and everybody wants to be respected, have a little dignity, and be just nice and kind to one another.
Question based on what you just kind of closed that off with. It's how you treat one another, because that's the direction I was going with the thoughts I was having. What does that mean, how you treat one another, when you look at this message that we've been learning?
Well, I know it's a cliche, but you treat them like you want to be treated. You
Which
treat
is
them
what?
like with dignity, with respect, with love, kindness.
But what is that called in terms of our study, in terms of this movement, in terms of the Bible? What is that? What is that? Sum it up. 2 words.
Equality.
No, no, no. Yes, but no. I'm looking for 2 particular words that we've heard along the way in this movement.
Golden rule?
The golden rule. Exactly. Loving your neighbor. Exactly. And all of it was right. But as I watched that video, I watched it last night, and then as I watched it just now, that's exactly what went through my mind. And in the within the golden rule, and the golden rule would be the 6 commandments, because you have the first 4, and then it's how you treat humanity. And when your rights are going to deny the right of another, are you practicing the golden rule?
No.
Yeah, so I don't know why I was like super emotional watching it this time. Um, had anybody heard, other than what I briefly shared with a couple of people last night, had anybody heard that about Cyrus before?
No, I have not.
Anybody else knew that
I
about
have not
Cyrus?
heard it before either, Lane.
I remember learning about that as a Protestant, how Cyrus was a unifier. And that's the weird thing about Donald Trump, is because they've labeled him
Huh.
Cyrus, the
Exactly.
and he is polar opposites of what the real Cyrus was like, because the real Cyrus really did exemplify democracy, and he brought nations, he brought other countries together, he brought people that were completely, totally different. And everywhere he went, even though he kept conquering, right? But he conquered in a way that people actually embraced him, people from different nations and different cultures. He unified. He was like the first unifier. So yeah, and so I find it very ironic that they've chosen to,
Call Trump.
Donald Trump as the new Cyrus, because he's totally the opposite of Cyrus.
Yeah, I did not know that until I found this website. Anybody else? Cyrus. Nice. Logina. If that was Logina, I think that was Logina.
Yes.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so I don't know if I made this big enough. We need to go a little bit bigger. And we'll go through. This is just another page on this. And I put the link in the chat. If there's anybody, Christine, if you notice that anybody joined us after I put the link, maybe repost the link so that you can get it. I did go ahead, and I'm struggling with this website for some reason or another, because within like where that video is, there's more to proceed through that page. And then each section up here, if you can see, each section has more to it, and it says continue, but it won't continue for some reason or other. I'm hoping to get it working for my own self to take a look at it better. But so anyways, let me see if I can get out of, there we go. So this is just, again, a brief background. Ava, go ahead before I get started. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say that the human rights issue in terms of leadership, I was thinking that it's really a system or an ideology, because when you think about, there's in every country in the world, there's always the same issue of human rights not being just for everyone. It doesn't matter, even if you go to an island almost. So it's an ideology to me in terms of the the word that came is the abuse, which reminded me that we were told a few weeks ago. Abuse. And so we definitely, people that are in power are going to be the ones doing the abusers, in other words. So it's an ideology that I think it's everywhere you go. You can even say it is in the field that where you're working, in whatever field, medical, educational, human services, whatever, doesn't matter. There's always something there. The rules and regulations that they've made, quote, so they can all follow and be organized and follow through. They don't bring justice to all the workers that are there. There's always something there that's abusing somebody under that system. So it just reminds me about the kingdom. The kingdom of this world has nothing to do with God's kingdom, because they all have some form of abuse. It could be open to the eye or subtle and hidden to the eye, but it's still there. The abuse. That's my comment.
Thank you. So if anybody could summarize in a very, I don't know if I'm going to ask this question well enough, in a very broad view with what Ava just described, I don't know that I can find a way to ask the question. What's this whole issue about that this movement and Adventism brought to view? Biggest picture you can think of. I'll give you a hint. There's a book with the title of it that has the same title.
Can you repeat that again, Elaine?
Okay. In the broadest sense, with what Ava just described and what we're looking at the golden rule about how you treat people. And what Ava's describing is everywhere you look, there's always those that abuse, and often the leaders or the governments that abuse. What is that describing? And in Adventism, there is a book with such title.
Is it Christ Object Lessons?
No.
Great.
The Great Controversy, Susan got. Yeah, it's Great Controversy.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
This big picture of this controversy. And I thought it was interesting what it shared about natural law, because that's where it brought in how it was always trampled on. Natural law then became natural rights. And it seemed to depict treating one another with dignity and respect, but who always got in the way? And it showed rulers and tyrants trampling upon the rights of others. And that's what we've seen in the article that we've been working on, that it was the rulers that always rejected or trampled on the principles of respect and freedom, dignity. So,
And I have a comment, Elaine.
yeah, go ahead, Jackie.
When you're done.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, I don't even know how to say this, but when the leaders are there not to really respect the rights of the people, then you have the people rise up against the leaders. And what I see is that it never goes anywhere but just war and loss and loss of life and whatever else that brings on, because it's not simply sitting back and respecting your employer, but fighting against your employer. And how is that ever resolved? it's the controversy going on between good and evil, or selfishness and selflessness. Because in the great controversy, that's what Lucifer brought into heaven because of his selfishness, because of that thinking that was there. And it's here on this earth, of course. So that was what's on my mind, is that the reaction to how a human being is treated is to defend themselves against being treated unfairly. So where do we see the great controversy playing out, not only with the corporate or those over the people, supposedly ruling the people fairly, but yet when it comes right down to it, the people feel they're not being treated fairly and equally. And they're going to defend themselves against that system. Just like the unions, people working for the unions, Boeing, this big, I mean, that's just an example right now. The people are sick and tired. They feel like they're oppressed and they're not getting paid fair wages and treated fairly for what they're doing working for Boeing. And now they're on strike, fighting back, trying to earn what they feel that their services are worth. And God is teaching us that's not the way we should act. That's not his way. I'm just bringing it down to earthly things that are practical that we can look at. And what is the solution?
Well, no, according to, I don't know, I think it's in the book Education. And maybe somebody can correct me, where she says that the rulers and such can't solve the problems.
Yes.
And you're right. I when it came to selfish and selfless, was kind of interesting because over the years, through the emotional abuse experience that I had, and then through the experience of my husband and alcoholism, I saw the battle within individuals and, observing in society, the battle between selfless and selfish. And I kind of came to my own conclusions early on that the core of sin was selfishness. And I don't know if that's right to say. I mean, I think it sounds right to say, but I mean, I don't, that there's far more to it. But I came to that a long time ago, that when you're selfish, that it seems to be the core of a lot of things we do and how we behave, versus if we're selfless. So we're this movement. 1989, a movement is raised up at the time of the end. It's a religious movement. It's interested in the second advent. And then there's a secular movement, human rights and climate change, that gets us involved in politics. So we've learned through Matthew 13, the wheat and the tares, right? That we're observers and workers. And I don't know that I have it in my own mind fully defined what that work means, with the exception of understanding to vote. And how I see that, and I don't know if that's right, but how I see it is, because we don't go out and protest and such, but doesn't our vote, depending on how we vote, doesn't our vote determine, doesn't the vote in this particular election determine whether you care about humanity or you don't care about humanity? you're a vote to protect people versus to oppress people in this broad spectrum of the 2024 vote. So
I believe you're
go
right.
go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, I believe you're correct.
I believe you're correct also, but there's some people look at it as though if I vote for Trump, I'll bring the second coming quicker, and that will be good for all humanity. It's not the way I think of it, but
Yeah,
that's the way some people think.
yeah. But
Yeah,
then
but
you go
that's
back
being
to,
fatalistic.
yeah, and you go back to, I think
I
Bill
agree.
brought this out in the spirit of prophecy that we are to, how did he say it? We are to fight against,
Resist.
resist. Yeah, resist. Thank you. And to literally prolong, which seems, because if all there's ever going to be is suffering, it sounds terrible to prolong, but to resist prophecy, and prophecy is that this will happen.
The longer we prolong, the more hearts possibly can be turned to God.
And I hope so. And then I got more on the board we'll look at later on that when we look at because the Sunday law history is the loud cry for the 144,000. And what's the purpose of the loud cry?
Is that to reap the harvest of the Nephilim?
Or to mature.
To mature. There you go. Because harvest is after the loud cry.
Okay.
So you have to be mature. What's another word for mature? In the agricultural model.
Right?
To ripen the harvest. So you get to that point for the Sunday law, and the Sunday law is the great test. Then what's left in the loud cry is to ripen. And it's going to ripen good fruit and bad fruit. So whatever we are at the Sunday law, the way I understand it, you get into the loud cry, it's only going to ripen what's already there. Is that how you understand it?
Yes.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
you can't all of a sudden change an apple into a banana.
So that
You're
comes
gonna you're gonna
exactly. So that goes with what? Oh, I lost that train of thought. Somebody
sorry.
else can say something. Go ahead. No, not you. It's me. Zips in and out. But I think somebody else was going to say something.
Eva has her hand up.
I think she already did. That was before, unless she put her
Oh,
hand up again.
my bad.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, you
I
do.
was
She
just
did. Okay.
it just followed what Christine had said about Trump. I also thought the other way with electing like the most democratic or equality um, person, which what appears to be Harris, right? That people can also vote for her because we do have to fight, right? Prophecy. But in the same realm, people can vote for her because she's going to give, quote, human rights to everyone here in the US. So we could also have different motives for, electing her because we are comfortable here. But then, according to what we've been listening, we're still, Elder Harmonder is still saying to us, telling us that the kingdom is still not of this world, meaning like that government is still full of flaws.
Corruption. Yeah.
So that we still have to have that in mind.
Yeah. Because it's not the kingdom of God. this movement is to be the kingdom of God, and the Democrat or the left, the Democrat side or the left is not the kingdom of God. There's corruption in it, just like there's corruption in the right. So thank you for that. So, so the
Oh, and
cylinder.
something else, sorry, and something else I wanted to mention before I forget
Sure,
was that there's people that want Trump to be president, but because they agree with his quote economic policies and others, and not necessarily because of the second advent. So there's still, that trust in this quote leader that's going to bring, things in order because they're being so chaotic. So you can, and you can always compare it with the Second World War during Hitler time when they were going through a lot of economic turmoil and so forth over there, and the Germans were just like, okay, everything you're promising is so good and all that, so we're gonna elect you and you be our leader. So it's the same kind of motives and reasonings behind it. Whoever is supporting Trump, really, there's no difference, with just a different era. That's all. Okay.
Thank you. And I don't know if anybody saw, sort of off topic, and we won't go into it, but if you have a chance, you can look it up. The Pope commenting on the election, and he doesn't. I don't. From what I read, I don't know that he specifically said which way a person should vote, but he talks about immigration and abortion, and I get out of it that he's pointing towards voting for Trump. I don't mean that he's going to vote, but I mean pointing people he wants Catholics in the U.S. to consider these things.
Can I just make a quick point? Because someone mentioned, that probably nobody here, I'm sure, would think to vote for Trump to speed things up. But actually, that sentiment was expressed only a week or two ago by someone else in a different group. So if Trump is the face of the Sunday law, which Elder Tess has already stated, it wouldn't be a good idea to vote for the Antichrist or the spirit of Antichrist. Because at that way, Mark, that would be receiving the mark of the beast. So just to say that.
Exactly. So, so you have the cylinder in 539, or the armies of Cyrus the Great, the first king of ancient Persia, conquered the city of Babylon, but it was his next actions that marked a major advance for man. He freed the slaves, declared that all people had the right to choose their own religion, and established racial equality. These and other decrees were recorded on a baked clay cylinder. Okay, so, and we already mentioned how that's completely opposite. Those that say that Trump is their Cyrus, that he's completely opposite of what Cyrus actually did. So we'll jump down if somebody wants to read the next section on the spread for human rights here. If somebody wants to volunteer to read.
I just want to make one more clarification since you mentioned about Cyrus again.
Sure.
Sorry.
Porque hacía un tiradero, viera. Esta mañana me hizo que le sirvieron un montón de cosas y ahí las dejó todas.
Just one second.
Sí.
Okay. Go ahead, Donna.
Okay, I kind of completely forgot what I was going to say. Sorry.
Cyrus, you were talking about Cyrus still.
Hey, it's something that you said. Gosh, I can't even remember.
Oh, you can cut us off if it comes back.
With Cyrus, just going back to Cyrus, the issue of Cyrus, and remembering what I learned when I was in Protestantism. I guess they chose Cyrus, Donald Trump, to be Cyrus, is because Cyrus was for one mentioned in Isaiah 45, and he was called the Anointed One, and he was called by God to rebuild the temple and to bring back his people. So that's kind of the mindset that now I can understand why they would choose Cyrus in that context. They weren't choosing Cyrus, the real Cyrus when he went out and, did this amazing thing. And I think, it's not in the Bible, but I don't know where it is, but I think they said that the prophet Jeremiah showed this prophecy to Cyrus saying that the God of all gods chose him and that Cyrus was so successful conquering and going and just conquering, but in Isaiah 45 it shows that God was the one that did that, and he was so humbled by that, even though he did not worship this strange God, that the prophet Jeremiah came to him and told him. I'm just kind of remembering this. I don't remember fully, but I think that's the reason they think that Donald Trump is going to free his people, which are now Christians, conservative Christians, from the wicked, I don't know, government, maybe, so I just want to throw that in there. Now I can remember why they did chose Cyrus is because of that.
And it was a dream. If anybody, a long time ago, I watched the movie. It was a dream that someone had.
Yeah, that the Trump prophecy.
So yeah, dreams and visions, and so we know where that.
Well, the main thrust of that's behind this evangelical is Pentecostalism, and they're all into that. Dreams, visions, speaking in tongues, doing sorcery and all that stuff. It's in their church. It's what they do. And now it's in the White House. When Donald Trump was there, it was very much in there because his spiritual leader was Paula White, and she's like known in the Pentecostal world as, a prophet of God. So.
Thank you. Do you feel like reading this little section here?
Oh, sure. Okay. Spread of human rights?
Yeah.
Okay. Not quite sure. There's a black box at the end of Greece. Does that?
Give me just 1 second to get rid of why that keeps popping up.
Okay. I think that's the end of it, but I'm not really sure.
I think it'll stop. So.
Okay.
Oh, I think you got that box. Okay, gone.
From Babylon, there you go. The idea of human rights spread quickly to India, Greece, and eventually Rome. There, the concept of natural law arose in observation of the fact that people tended to follow certain unwritten laws in the course of life. And Roman law was based on rational ideas derived from the nature of things. That makes sense. Documents asserting individual rights, such as the Magna Carta, 1215, the Petition of Right, 1628, the U.S. Constitution, 1787, the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizens, 1789, and the U.S. Bill of Rights, 1791, are the written precursors to many of today's human rights documents. It's really interesting how they got all of that from Cyrus's cylinder, and they discovered that cylinder. I forget when they discovered it, but the fact that they can read it and that the language, that ancient language, is still able to be, interpreted is kind of amazing. So anyway.
Yeah. Thank you. So who wants to read the next section on the Magna Carta? Because this came up in our article that we're working on. And I confess my ignorance. I'm going to pause this 1 second and get rid of the black boxes because I want to keep the chat open. Because you'll read it. Okay, because it came up in the article that we're reading, and I admitted my, call it lack of memory, lack of paying attention in school, whatever it was, that couldn't remember the significance of the Magna Carta, and I think it was Fowler Logina. So go ahead and if you would read that out.
The Magna Carta, 1215. The Magna Carta, or Great Charter, was arguably the most significant early influence on the extensive historical process that led to the rule of constitutional law today in the English-speaking world. In 1215, after King John of England violated a number of ancient laws and customs by which England had been governed, his subjects forced him to sign the Magna Carta, which enumerates what later came to be thought of as human rights. Among them was the right of the church to be free from governmental interference, the rights of all free citizens to own and inherit property, and to be protected from excessive taxes. It established the right of widows who owned property to choose not to remarry, and established principles of due process and equality before the law. It also contained provisions forbidding bribery and official misconduct. Widely viewed as one of the most important legal documents in development of modern democracy, the Magna Carta was a crucial turning point in the struggle to establish freedom.
So that was 1215. And I think it was Fel or Lozina last week that found a quick summary of it so where the rulers couldn't trample upon the people. Is that the way you summarized that, or what you found? If I had that correct?
Yes.
They couldn't, they weren't to trample and that's what we saw in the video briefly too. That this natural law that became natural rights, and we see in the article that we're reading as well, that was what the leaders, the government and leaders always did, was refuse or reject or resist the freedoms and principles of freedom for people. Okay, so if somebody wants to go on to the next one, the petition of rights. So we've got 1215, 539, 1215, and 1628, the petition of right, if somebody wants to read that one.
I'll read it, Elaine.
Thanks.
Yes. If my voice can go through this without breaking up. Petition of Rights, 1628. The next recorded milestone in the development of human rights was the Petition of Right, produced in 1628 by the English Parliament and sent to Charles I as a statement of civil liberties. Refusal by Parliament to finance the king's unpopular foreign policy had caused his government to exact forced loans and to quarter troops in subjects' houses as an economy measure. Arbitrary arrest and imprisonment for opposing these policies had produced in Parliament a violent hostility to Charles and to George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham. The Petition of Right, initiated by Sir Edward Coke, was based upon earlier statutes and charters and asserted four principles. Number one, no taxes may be levied without consent of Parliament, and charters and asserted four principles. Number one, no tax. Okay. I think I skipped something there. I'll read that again. Yeah, number one, I'll read it again. No taxes may be levied without consent of Parliament. Number two, no subject may be imprisoned without cause shown. Reaffirmation of the right of habeas corpus. Number three, no soldier may be quartered upon the citizenry. And number four, martial law may not be used in time of peace.
I did share, I think it was with Marcia last night, an interesting thing on this because this is 1628 and this is following this is Charles the First, if I understand correctly, or from that he was the son of King James, the King James of the authorized, version of the Bible. And this George Villiers, this is totally a side note, but you can look them up. They were very corrupt, involved in a lot of shady and corrupt things. So they're going after these rights or the rights of the people, again against the governments and rulers and monarchies that are trampling. So if there was no taxes to be levied without the consent of Parliament, it's good. Parliament's going to step in between and have to be the one, if I understand this correctly, have to be the one to decide because the king can just tax anybody everything. Going back into Samuel, where God tells Samuel, tell him what the manner of the king is. And so they're just going to wildly tax to support themselves as opposed to taxes that are meant to benefit society. And then no subjects being imprisoned without cause shown, no soldiers being quartered upon the citizenry because they could just go in and take over a person's home is the way I understand it. So to put some restraint, that's how I understand that, to put some restraint on government. Is that how you understand that? Hold them in check, checks and
Yes,
Yes.
yes. And I also, in quotations there in the parentheses, it says that the Petition of Right in 1628 was the reaffirmation of the right of habeas corpus. And habeas corpus came about from the Magna Carta. And I don't know if most of you know what habeas corpus is, but corpus is body in Latin, and it means show me the body. It can be taken several ways in law. One way is that they can't just lock someone up. They have to bring that person physically, their body, to a court of their peers. So they can't just be detained for no good reason, right? Without witnesses. And the other way that it's used is with murder. And that's why it's so difficult without a body. If somebody is being accused of murder, if they can't find the body, they have a really difficult time because then it's mostly circumstantial evidence, right? So usually they have a much better time if the body is found and they can put that together. So I just wanted to show that the habeas corpus, that was really big. It's really big, and we hear it a lot today. And I didn't realize, I was reading on the Magna Carta when we had this talk the other night, and that habeas corpus came about from that. And then what you're presenting to us today shows how it was reaffirmed, and just this whole historical line that's being presented, that's theming everything together. It's very good. Appreciate it. Thank you.
do you want to read the next section on the Declaration of Independence?
Okay. So the United States Declaration of Independence, 1776. On July 4th, 1776, the United States Congress approved the Declaration of Independence. Its primary author, Thomas Jefferson, wrote the Declaration as a formal explanation of why Congress had voted on July 2nd to declare independence from Great Britain more than a year after the outbreak of the American Revolutionary War, and as a statement announcing that the 13 American colonies were no longer a part of the British Empire. Congress issued the Declaration of Independence in several forms. It was initially published as a printed broadsheet that was widely distributed and read to the public. Philosophically, the Declaration stressed two things: individual rights and the right of revolution. These ideas became widely held by Americans and spread internationally as well, influencing in particular the French Revolution.
And we've been seeing that as the revolutionary periods came about, a lot due to the fight for human rights and equality along the way. So we're living in that now.
And a declaration
watching.
is like, if you have to go to court, if somebody is suing you for something, or you're being asked to come to court, you have the right to write a declaration to the court. It's like a petition to the court to explain your side of it or whatever. And so you can kind of see the progress on this too, because first a declaration had to be presented with the grievances that the people were claiming, right, against the tyranny they were being oppressed by. And they call this Declaration of Independence, it's known as, I've said this before, but maybe on repeat, it's good. It's known as the spirit of the Constitution that produced led to the steps that led to the Constitution.
Yeah, thank you.
Were you able to hear me? Because I just noticed my internet's not stable.
No,
I got one of those.
You
Oh,
stayed
okay,
on
good.
the whole time. So yeah, it was
Good.
good.
Thank
Thank
you.
Yeah. Okay, so who wants to read the next section as we continue to progress through here? We're going to get to a dead end because this won't continue I don't remember where it ends, but I'm not able to advance through each page for some reason or other. But I only wanted to focus on this section for now, and then we'll look at the board. But who would like to read this next section on the Constitution?
I can.
Okay, thanks.
The Constitution of the United States of America, 1787, and Bill of Rights, 1791. Written during the summer of 1787 in Philadelphia, the Constitution of the United States of America is the fundamental law of the U.S. federal system of government and the landmark document of the Western world. It is the oldest written national constitution in use and defines the principal organs of government and their jurisdictions and the basic rights of citizens. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, came into effect on December 15, 1791, limiting the powers of the federal government of the United States and protecting the rights of all citizens, residents, and visitors in American territory. The Bill of Rights protects freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to keep and bear arms, the freedom of assembly, and the freedom to petition. It also prohibits unreasonable search and seizure, cruel and unusual punishment, and compelled self-incrimination. Among the legal protections it affords, the Bill of Rights prohibits Congress from making any law respecting establishment of religion and prohibits the federal government from depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. In federal criminal cases, it requires indictment by a grand jury for any capital offense or infamous crime, guarantees a speedy public trial with an impartial jury in the district in which the crime occurred, and prohibits double jeopardy.
So graduating towards, or gradually going towards more and more and this is the beginning of this nation, what when you look at the Great Controversy and working through sinful humanity to bring about equality.
Yeah.
We're kind of tracing from Cyrus on down. And I'm going to pull up after we get through with this section a little thing that I found when it comes to the UN, and because we have to look at how the UN fits into all of this as well.
Could I just make a small point
Yeah,
before you
sure.
keep going?
Sure.
On the double jeopardy, I know we've seen a lot about that, and it just crossed my mind, right? Just so I'm clear, double jeopardy is that you can't be tried for a crime that you've already been tried for. And I was thinking how, even with the word radical, how our idea of what it meant had so changed and amalgamated to a different form in our minds of what radical really was meant to be, and how so many of these laws that were written for good have gotten twisted, for bad, and how so many of terms have been co-opted, like woke, for instance, like Elder Parmenter has brought out. And you see double jeopardy being used the same way how it's been perverted, where someone who has indeed is a murderer, but for whatever reason can buy their way through the dream team type of attorney on their behalf or whatever, and can be found innocent, or the 12 jurors can't agree, so they're let go, and they can't be tried for that. Even if evidence comes up later, they can't be tried for that crime, even if the evidence proves they're guilty.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how things that started out to be for the good have been so perverted.
I think we just look back at Donald Trump's history and how he has learned to use the court system for his benefit.
Yes, yes.
So the Declaration of Rights and Man of the Citizen, 1789. In 1789, the people of France brought about the abolishment of the absolute monarchy and set the stage for the establishment of the First French Republic. Just 6 weeks after the storming of the Bastille, and barely 3 weeks after the abolition of feudalism, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, I'm not going to pronounce that in French, was adopted by the National Constituent Assembly as the step toward writing a constitution for the Republic of France. The Declaration proclaims that all citizens are to be guaranteed the rights of liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. It argues that the need for law derives from the fact that the exercise, quoting, the exercise of the natural rights of each man has only those borders which assure other members of the society the enjoyment of these same rights. Thus, the Declaration sees law as an expression of the general will, intended to promote this equality of rights and to forbid only actions harmful to society. So we see it continuing to progress in the revolutions also that come about because of the tyranny. Something else I was reading, we've all, I think, from our Walter Bright days heard, some of you probably heard of it beforehand, but Hegel. But Hegel actually believed that the glorification of humanity would come through the state or leaders. That was I didn't know that, but that's not the way it's going to come. Yeah, and that he actually saw Napoleon as trying to do that. So, okay, who wants to read the Geneva Convention.
I can read.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, the first Geneva Convention, 1864. In 1864, 16 European countries and several American states attended a conference in Geneva at the invitation of the Swiss Federal Council on the initiative of the Geneva Committee. The diplomatic conference was held for the purpose of adopting a convention for the treatment of wounded soldiers in combat. The main principle laid down in the convention and maintained by the later Geneva Conventions provided for the obligation to extend care without discrimination to wounded and sick military personnel, and respect for and marking of medical personnel transports and equipment with a distinctive sign of the Red Cross on a white background.
Thank you. This is as far as we're going to go on this one. And I hope to be able to figure out how to make that website work for me so that I can go through and kind of dig a little deeper, because it ends there and I wanted it to continue. But we're going to go back and review now some of the, if you can see the board, and I can close the blinds a little bit, it's a little bit too bright on there. Is that a little better? Maybe?
Yeah, yes, but it's kind of far away because the print is kind of small, but maybe as you articulate it, it will come clearer to us.
That's okay. I'll move it closer. Better?
Yes,
Little-
that is better.
Okay. So I
And
just
then
want to
push it to the opposite side of you a little bit.
that way.
Yeah, there. Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Maybe
so I
you
wanna
could
focus
take
on
a
this.
picture.
Yeah, I will do that.
And now a
Okay.
picture.
Yeah.
Because
We're
I
so
mostly just
bossy.
focus on here. This is where we're kind of at, where we're at on our article. But when I learned about part about Cyrus, I wanted to make sure to put that in there. So I thought I'd just kind of line it up, so we can trace through. And there's more pieces to put in that I'm kind of trying to find along the way. But when you go back to Cyrus and see that first initial, that's where they're looking at this first human rights first being addressed. And so we see that in 539 BC, conquering of Babylon, that he frees the slaves and people are allowed to choose their religion. And then he wants to end racial discrimination and the other things that we read in there. Then you jump forward to 1215, you have the Magna Carta, and that was to an attempt to end tyranny of government or leaders from trampling on the people. And then the Petition of Right. Did it say 1626 or 1628? Some of this I might have done out of memory. So I don't know if somebody remembers if it said 1626 or
28.
28, yeah.
That's what I got. Just now realizing that I think it said that. Okay. And then we looked at from the other article that we're reading, 1688 to 89 was the Glorious Revolution. And that was the time frame of John Locke and him writing what was the precursor to the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and property, the pursuit of property, where it develops into life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence. So Thomas Jefferson takes from John Locke to put that into. But what was the problem with this Declaration of Independence? What was the problem in the wording?
You
Who
want
did
the obvious one that
Probably.
it's always men that's written
Yeah.
and not women, not all
Yes.
people.
Right. And so then you go to the Constitution, 1787, and then the Bill of Rights. And then we arrive at the time of the end, and the woman, fled into the wilderness, right? So you have now this nation that's going to be the glorious land to, the best that I understand it, continue this work till you get to the place where you're supposed to be. And so in 1948, I believe it is, and this is what I kind of want to read on one other article before we go back to the other one that we've been working on, with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where we saw in the video that we just watched that they never had any teeth. And is that how it said it? There was never any law to back it up with. It was just people's ideas and the 30 declarations. Go ahead, somebody gonna say something?
Correct. That's
Yeah.
correct.
So it never had any law to back it up in. But the thing that I find interesting is in what we're seeing what we'll be seeing in the other article that we've been working through is that the UN, the United States, doesn't support a lot of the things the UN does. Which I always thought was interesting. So you have 1948. And we're going to read a brief little paragraph that's going to talk about roughly on the Helsinki Accords. And the Helsinki Accords is where some critics say that human rights, this universal human rights began, but they bring it back to 1948. So they're not right in that. But here's what the Helsinki Accords were. And this might be kind of small. I don't think you can quite read it, but I will take a picture of it. But freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief. And then also equal rights and self-determination. But that wasn't the beginning. The beginning is back here. And then everything else that we've been looking at. So Luke, I see you.
Yeah, that's really good, Elaine. Thank you for that summary. And just to piggyback what Christine said, and we all know this, that besides the problem with how the Declaration of Independence was written, the verbiage of men, it was also unwritten, but inferred that it was a privileged class of men only.
White.
Yeah.
Yes.
And rich.
We still didn't. Go ahead, Christine. Oh.
And rich and white.
So we still weren't looking at the golden rule as applying to everybody. So since Luke volunteered, I have you read this little section here. This is and we're only going to just read this piece of it, but it's a critique actually of or a review of a book, and the book is called Evidence for Hope. And I don't know if I agree with everything that the article, I was reading through it this morning, but I'd have to take more time with it. But I did find this piece where it talks about the Helsinki Accords, and it also let's see how far back that was. Yeah, right in here. It talks about the human rights advocacy, advocating for human rights, basically being the handmaiden to neoliberal policies. So neoliberal policies imposed by the West on the global South. And so I had to look that up because I know the program, Margaret Atwood, right? And the handmaiden, I wanted to know what it was trying to say. But the term handmaiden refers to a person or entity that is seen as serving or supporting another more powerful or dominant entity. In the context of this document, the term handmaiden is used to describe how some critics view human rights advocacy, critics, so we're not talking about people that are these are talking about people that criticize, to describe how some critics view human rights advocacy as being subservient to neoliberal policies imposed by the West. So it's an opinion. So Luke, if you would read this paragraph here.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. In Evidence for Hope, Catherine Sikink, a professor at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, offers a spirited response on the question of the provenance and therefore the legitimacy of human rights. She fills in the partial history that Moyne and other critics have emphasized. While critics often depict human rights as beginning in the 1970s with the Helsinki Accords, recognition of freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief, and equal rights and self-determination, Sikink demonstrates that the call for human rights protections in fact began far earlier in the 1940s and with significant support from the global South. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for example, was preceded and deeply influenced by the American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Man, which all 20 Latin American nations and the United States adopted 8 months earlier in April 1948. It was Latin American nations over the resistance of the US and the UK that insisted on including human rights language in the United Nations Charter. The enumeration of women's rights in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was largely attributable to two Latin American women, Bertha Lutz, the Brazilian delegate, and Minerva Bernardino from the Dominican Republic. This is hardly the work of neoliberal imperialists.
So, and going along with the same theme, and I don't know if anybody else has looked into this, but it seems that the United States was not on board with a lot of the things that the UN wanted to do or tried to do. But this article goes on to talk about I think this is the paragraph. If you want to read the next paragraph. And Susan put in Global South, the nations of the world which are regarded as having a relatively low level of economic and industrial development and are typically located in the south more industrialized nations. Thank you for putting that in there. So if you want to read the next paragraph.
Sure. It should not be surprising that the call for human rights was supported by the less powerful nations of the Global South. It is generally in the interests of the weak to support international standards as they provide a basis for criticizing and holding accountable the strong. Sikink writes, the less powerful embrace the idea of the international protection of human rights in attempts to restrain the more powerful, not vice versa. Early voices for human rights included the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa and the many campaigns for decolonization. In short, charges that international standards for human rights were imposed by the powerful nations of the West on the rest of the world are based on an incomplete account of history.
So does anybody ever looked into that? If that statement is just from some of the things that I've been reading, it, like I said, in the other article that we're working on that was from the Britannica website, that about the United States not being on board with a lot of the things that the UN was doing. So this is saying that I kind of view it again as back where we were talking about the bigger picture, the great controversy. You see in the fight for human rights, the striving towards human rights, and going back to the Magna Carta, that you wouldn't have leaders and governments trampling on the rights of the citizens or human beings. So in here you have the less powerful nations, the ones doing the fighting for rights, with the more powerful ones that seem to be resisting. Is that what you're getting out of this? That's what I've been seeing.
I was thinking the very same thing, Elaine, and it helped me to look up what Global South meant, because I really didn't know what that was referring to. And when it said that it's the less powerful, right, those who are in most need of human rights. And it correlates to the book Democracy in Chains, because the very wealthy and the ones who are so afraid of losing their power, dominance, and wealth dislike democracy because they know there is more of the oppressed than there is of the wealthy elite. So democracy would eventually ruin them in their minds, the elite. So that is why I see this struggle to even come up with a clear definition of human rights, even at the UN level. Even though we know the UN is our friend, as we've been reading what you've been providing for us all along the way, not just today, but all along the way, we can see that there is kind of parameters. At least I'm seeing it. I hope others are seeing what I'm saying. There's kind of like unwritten parameters in those writings to where they're leaving open still a foot, a way for someone to get their foot in the door. They're not still clear enough to me on. Do you follow what I'm saying, Elaine?
Yeah, I think so. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So they're basically, it should be cut and dried. It should be so simple, like you have said, human rights, right? But they're still kind of dickering over it all, even at that Declaration of Human Rights level in those writings, and how, whether it was moral. Remember all the different items they were addressing, and so yeah, it just seems to me you can see that failure is kind of in there. It's because they have not closed the gaps on what it is.
It seems to be powerful government against the weak citizenry.
Yeah.
What would happen if the powerful governments truly supported human rights? Oh, Christine has her hand up too. Go ahead, Christine.
So I've been doing some studying on the UN, and the way it works is like, well, every country is part of the United Nations, right? But not every country can afford to give money, right? So the countries that can give money, and some countries can give a lot of money. That would be like the United States gives the most amount of money. And then a lot of the countries that cannot give money will give people for, as soldiers, volunteers, not volunteer, soldiers, workers, things like that. So they give people. But every country that gives, especially like people, countries that give a lot, like the United States and the countries that give a lot of people. And right now I'm running a blank on those countries, but they're the countries that you really don't want in charge of soldiers. The United States and those other countries feel like they have a say in the way that things are run. And so they will insist that the UN does this or the UN does that, because no matter what, the countries themselves still want their way, right? Even though the UN, the organization, is trying to fight for human rights, keep everything equal, the countries that are supplying the money and the people are still trying to dictate their way. Like I can't think of the country, but one of them that gives like the most soldiers was trying to enforce that their generals would be in charge, even though since they were giving so many people. And I'll bring that up in my presentation. There's more to that, but anyway, it's yeah. I'm not sure if I'm making my point, but anyway, the nations still try to run the show, even though they're not in charge.
Powerful nations.
Well, powerful, it depends on what I mean. Powerful is in the United States gives a lot of money, but there's other nations that give a lot of soldiers.
Right.
And so they're powerful over their people, but they're not like, it's not like, say, Russia, China, and the United States. It's, I'm going to throw out a name, and I can't remember if this is the right country, like the Congo, right? So one of the countries that have like killed a lot of the citizens, and I can't remember if that's the right name for the country, who's given a whole lot of soldiers, and they wanted all their generals to be like in charge. And there was bad things that happened, and it's because there wasn't any rules. Like once those soldiers were in there was no way to stop them from doing bad things. So some of the UN soldiers were doing the bad things.
Yes, I've seen that. Yeah.
Right. And at the time when that was happening with that country, there were no rules to prevent that.
And that would be where I think from what I'm getting out of our bodies, their battlefields, where some of the atrocities that did take place against women
Mhm.
and children, they came to be the women that actually did stand up, few and far between, because it's what they deal with is such trauma and trauma on top of trauma and then more trauma on top of that. And to say anything for many of them winds up being
More
either
trauma
too painful or too fearful
or death.
or death. Yeah, fearful death. Yes. But for those that do, there was some headway to at least come to a place where they recognize and acknowledge legally that rape being used as a weapon in war and then could be tried instead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it has been tried, but there hasn't been enough witnesses
Right.
to convict all the bad.
Right. Yeah, it always amazes me to see that human beings can treat another human being in such a way. It seems like, I don't know, it seems like a no-brainer, but you know, we don't all think the same. That's obvious. So, but thank you for sharing that part, and I'll look forward to your study on the UN, because a lot of this is connected, you know,
Yeah.
back and forth to the UN.
Yeah, with the human rights and yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So I think before we go back to share screen, hang on, we'll go back up. Let me pull the board up again real quick and just look at what we were looking at before. And because we just started talking about how it but talks about the three generations. Hopefully you can see that it's this section here, the three generations of human rights, and showing that the three generations were not linear. It wasn't that one dies away and the next one comes along. They were cumulative, overlapping, and interdependent. And I added another word that it had in there, interpenetrating. So you have these three generations is how they, when it came to the fact that they can't define human rights and they disagree on the definition of human rights, this was what followed that section in the article of how things that they have come to at least understand, but they're not all accepted. So the first one was liberty, which liberty was the civil and political rights. We just kind of barely touched on that one. And it was the right from, freedom from, is what I think I meant to write, freedom from here. So the different things like freedom from the government trampling on you, etc. So the freedom from, and it was connected to the civil and political rights. And then equality was the economic, social, and cultural rights, which we'll see was the freedom to, the right to or freedom to. And then fraternity was talking about the solidarity or groups rights. The way I understand that, if I have it right, is that 1 and 2 are the individual, and then 3 makes up the institution, if I have that right.
May I make a comment?
Yeah, sure.
We can see how liberty has been corrupted, the word liberty, and how it's been turned upside down, right? All you need to do is think of a libertarian and the liberty that they want, or the libertines that the Bible mentions. And then equality, again, is sort of, we know what the true definition of equality means, but there are those who only see equality within their own group. And then fraternity, if you go to the root word of fraternity, that means brotherhood. So they're still only elevating patriarchal beliefs, whether they realize it or not, because fraternity is brotherhood, doesn't include the women, right? And it's an unwritten, assumed understanding amongst what we've come to understand as the elite.
Yeah, and I guess it would depend too, based on what what it's going to say in this article, is that solidarity or group rights. So group rights could be made up though of women's or LGBTQ or what have you.
Yes,
and I,
we see that, but I'm
yeah,
just saying that that wording, and
yeah,
especially if you consider what the Supreme Court has done with going back to the original intent of what, and that's what we do. We begin there when we read because we have to understand the context of when something was written, but they're returning to that ideology. They're not using that as a jumpstart base to move forward. They're returning to that
right.
old idea of what it originally meant. And so just by having the wording like that allows people with that corrupted mindset to use that as their rhetorical argument for human rights. You know what I mean? It leaves a gaps. It leaves gaps.
Yes, yes. We're not going to get very far in kicking back into to the main article that we're working on, but I think it's all been good. Um, so we'll basically just do a quick review again and hit liberty, and then we're going to have to continue on another time and getting into equality and then fraternity. So, but I think everybody has the article, and it was shared in the West Coast forum, I know. So, and I think some on the East Coast actually have the article too from being here, and we put it in the chat. So this is the content of human rights, 3 generations of rights. And so like all normative traditions, the human rights tradition is a product of its time. Therefore, to understand better the debate over the content and legitimate scope of human rights and the priorities claimed among them, it is useful to note the dominant schools of thought and action that have informed the human rights tradition since the beginning of modern times. So these the thought and action, and that being the liberty, equality, and fraternity. So particularly helpful in this regard is the notion of 3 generations of human rights, and it says that there are 3 themes from the French Revolution, and they are not linear. The first was the civil and political rights or liberty. The second was the and economic, social, and cultural rights or equality. And the third, solidarity or group rights or fraternity. um, so let's see. So we'll just touch on liberty again, and then we'll probably have to close it off and pick this up and continue it on. So civil liberty and political rights, the first generation civil and political rights. Actually, if somebody else would want to read, that would be great. Luke, I don't know, somebody else, whoever wants to read. We did already touch on this section the last time we looked at this. Anybody want to read?
If nobody else wants to, I can read.
Okay.
The Liberté, civil and political rights. The first generation, civil and, can you make just a bit larger, please?
Sure. Let me figure out where I got multiple things open, so I wasn't sure which place was going to enlarge it. Did that work? Is that good?
Yes, it's better. Thank you.
Okay.
The first generation, civil and political rights, derives primarily from the 17th and the 18th century reformist theories noted above, i.e., those associated with the English, American, and French revolutions. Infused with a political philosophy of liberal individualism and the related economic and social doctrine of laissez-faire, the first generation conceives of human rights more in negative terms, freedoms from, than positive ones, rights to. It favors the abstention over the intervention of government in the quest for human dignity. Belonging to this first generation, thus, are rights such as those set forth in Articles 2 through 21 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, including freedom from gender, racial, and equivalent forms of discrimination, the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, freedom from slavery or involuntarily servitude, freedom from torture and from cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment of punishment, freedom from arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile, the right to a fair and public trial, freedom from interference in privacy and correspondence, freedom of movement and residence, the right to asylum from persecution, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, freedom of opinion and expression, freedom of peacefully assembly and association, and the right to participate in government directly or through free elections. Also included are the right to own property and the right not to be deprived of it arbitrarily. Rights that were fundamental to the interests fought for in the American and French revolutions and to the rise of capitalism.
And that's kind of where we left last night in discussing the issue here with capitalism and its role that it plays in the oppression of people.
And
Go ahead.
property, the right
Property.
to own property.
And making it difficult.
Yeah, but most people think that just means like land or a home, right? But that applied to slaves. That applies to people's ideas of the perfect wife, the trad wife or whatever, right? The patriarchal idea of family and who's property and who's the ruler and owner of that property.
It's interesting the way you say that, if I followed correctly, that you could have two different views on this depending on your worldview. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. That's what I thought I got out of that. Yes.
Very clear. Thank you for making that clear, because that is what I'm saying. And that goes back to what I even said earlier at FIT, where you can take one word and it can have a whole different meaning to one group of people and a whole different meaning to another group of people.
Based on your worldview.
Yes.
Okay, if you want to finish off this paragraph, then we'll close.
Okay.
And take a break.
Yet, it would be wrong to assert that these and other first generation rights correspond completely to the idea of negative as opposed to positive rights. The right to security of the person, to a fair and public trial, to asylum from persecution, or to free elections, for example, manifestly cannot be assured without some affirmative government action. What is constant in this first generation conception is the notion of liberty, a shield that safeguards the individual alone and in association with others against the abuse of political authority. This is the core value featured in the constitution of almost every country in the world and dominating the majority of international declarations and covenants adopted since World War II, in large measure due to the brutal denial of the fundamentals of civic belonging, and democratic inclusion during the Nazi era, this essentially Western liberal conception of human rights is sometimes romanticized as a triumph of the individualism of Hobbes and Locke over Hegel's glorification of the state.
That's what took me to want to look up a little bit more on Hegel. Instead of just hearing the name, I wanted to know a little bit about what he was, because he believed that the glorification of the state came from the glorification of humanity came from the glorification of the state or the leaders, if I understood that correctly. So, oh, wait a second. Well, we can see in here just for a quick glance of what I got out of this is the need for checks and balances. But what good are checks and balances when you're always fighting two separate worldviews? Because we see the checks and balances being dissolved based on, there's a lot, but based on different worldviews as well. When you bring in the libertarians, that but because to have this, it cannot be assured without some affirmative government action. So you have to have some government action, but you have to keep that government also in check. Did that make sense?
Yeah, to me it did.
So we'll keep working on this as we progress forward to where we're at today to try to better understand human rights and equality. But for now, if we can close in prayer, is there somebody who'd like to close in prayer for us? Volunteer? I'll go ahead. I'll volunteer. Almighty God in heaven, Lord, we thank you for the blessing and the privilege to be able to gather together and study, and for the light that you've shined on the path in helping us in this preparation as we fast approach our great test. It'll take us into a period that will only ripen what we already are. And it's my prayer, Lord, that we are prepared for the ripening in this movement, and that we would have success and victory in this journey. We pray that you would bless, guide, and direct us and continue to lead us through. And we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.